I ran that factory floor for 22 years without a single serious accident. That wasn't luck. That was systems, training, gut instinct, listening to the machines, watching the crew fixing things before they became problems. That floor was my domain, steel, sweat, and rhythm. And now I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room while a man in a tailored shirt and zero oil stains told me I was no longer needed. My name's Jack McCready. I'm 58. Or as Barton Precision's new operations director probably saw me, expensive old, and in the way. Jack Patricia from HR began, her voice syrupy and sterile. We're implementing a leadership restructuring initiative. Next to her sat Evan Trask, fresh from somewhere with palm trees and PowerPoints. His suit was crisp, his hands soft, and he looked at me like I was a relic, something he'd studied once in a business school case study. We're aiming to align supervisory roles with strategic efficiencies, Evan added, pushing a folder toward me. This is part of a broader shift toward data-driven production models. I opened the folder. Severance terms. Not generous, but not insulting either. 2 weeks' notice. Half my pension up front, the rest drip-fed in monthly payouts. I flipped the page. Your replacement starts tomorrow, Patricia said, like she was announcing a new lunch option. Logan Myers, Oklahoma State business grad. Very promising. He's looking forward to learning from you. I didn't say anything for a while. I just stared at the wood grain on the table. The factory had changed ownership twice since I started, first when Barton sold to Alliance Manufacturing, then when Axiom Partners took over 2 years ago. With each change came new metrics, new slogans, new bosses with buzzwords and zero floor time. Still, I thought I was too embedded to be removed. I'd trained half the foremen out there, wrote most of the safety protocols myself, knew every pressure gauge and motor hum like I knew my own heartbeat. I cleared my throat. Just so I'm clear, I said, looking directly at Evan, you want me to train the man who's replacing me in 2 weeks? Patricia shifted uncomfortably. Evan gave a shallow smile. We see it as a knowledge transfer opportunity. Your legacy carried forward. I gave a single nod. Got it. That was it. I didn't argue. Didn't ask for more. What was the point? The decision wasn't made in that room. It had been made months ago, probably in some spreadsheet. My name in one cell, my salary in the next, and a red line through both. They weren't firing me for performance. They were cutting me because I cost more than a kid in loafers and a LinkedIn account. The meeting ended with a handshake. Patricia handed me the packet. Evan thanked me for my years of exemplary service, then walked out without waiting for a response. I stood in that empty room for a minute longer, staring through the glass at the floor I knew better than my own living room. The machines looked smaller from up here. Cleaner, like props on a stage. As I walked back to my locker, heads turned. A few of the older guys nodded at me, tight nods the kind men give when they don't know what to say. I didn't stop, just kept walking. I knew right then that Logan wouldn't last. Not because he was a bad guy, I hadn't even met him yet, but because some things you can't teach in 2 weeks. You can hand someone a checklist. You can show them where to punch in parts orders, but you can't make them feel the moment a belt's about to give or hear when the motor's whining out of sync. You can't replace gut instinct with a dashboard graph. That night I didn't go straight home. I took the long route down by the old refinery where my dad used to work before it shut down. He always told me a man's worth is in what he builds, not what he brags about. I built something at Barton, a safety culture, a crew that trusted each other, a system that worked, and now I had 2 weeks to watch someone dismantle it, clipboard in hand. I wasn't angry, not yet. That would come later. For now I was just done, but not finished. I passed the old Ashland refinery on the drive home. The stacks were long dead, just rusting metal bones against the Texas sky, but I always slowed down when I hit that stretch. My dad worked there until they shut it down in '91. He used to come home with grease in his hair and burns on his forearms, but he never complained. Said the job made sense to him. Fire pressure torque things you could understand with your hands. He used to tell me a man's worth is in what he builds. Jack, don't ever let anyone measure you by what you say. I thought about that as I passed the gates of Barton Precision. 22 years, that's what I'd built. Not just machinery, but stability, reliability, trust. For the guys on the floor, for the systems that kept them safe. For the younger techs who came in with fresh certifications but didn't know how to listen to a sputtering weld line or smell coolant leaking from a worn valve. I didn't go home right away. I pulled into a diner across from a truck yard and ordered a coffee I didn't need. Just needed a place to sit that didn't smell like welding rods and floor polish. It hit me harder than I expected. I remembered the early days when Matthew was still in diapers and Sherry and I thought we had the future by the collar. I took the job at Barton because it had union protection and good benefits. I was working nights back then. 3 shifts a week at first, then double shifts when the overtime kicked in. I missed birthday parties, baseball games, first days of school. Always told myself it was temporary. It wasn't. The promotions came slow and steady. First to supervisor after 3 years, then assistant foreman after 7. By the time I was lead foreman, Matthew was in middle school and Sherry had already started pulling away. She said I was married to the job. Said she barely recognized the man who left at 5 a.m. and came home with his hands so stiff he couldn't hold a fork. She left when Matthew was 16. Took him to Colorado. Said they needed a fresh start. I didn't fight her. Didn't know how. Didn't want to make it harder on him than it already was. So I buried myself in the work. I knew every inch of that floor. Could walk it blindfolded and still tell you which machine was out of alignment by the vibrations under my boots. I could spot a jam before the sensor did. Tell when the temperature was off, just by the way the paint fumes hung in the air. There's something comforting about machines. They don't lie. They don't flatter or play politics. If something's wrong, they let you know if you're listening. The trouble started when Barton sold to Alliance Manufacturing in 2018. Alliance kept things mostly intact, just rebranded the name and installed digital logbooks. But when Axiom Partners took over 2 years ago, everything changed. Guys with clipboards started showing up. Budget reviews, software rollouts. They brought in process consultants who asked a lot of questions but never stuck around long enough to understand the answers. It was death by 1,000 cuts. The maintenance budget shrank. Overtime approvals got tighter. Requisition forms for basic parts started getting rejected unless we provided cost-benefit justifications. You can't put a dollar sign on a safety margin, but try telling that to a man with a bonus tied to quarterly savings. Still, I held the line, fought for my guys, kept the schedules tight even when it meant shifting people around or stepping in myself on swing shifts. I covered for people who needed a breather. I bent the rules without breaking them when it meant keeping someone safe, and I thought that counted for something. I finished my coffee and stared out at the trucks idling across the road. I could smell diesel and see the drivers checking their manifests boots thudding against metal steps. Honest work. I thought about Logan Myers. Fresh out of college, probably never stripped a clogged regulator or reset a trip switch by hand. I wasn't mad at him. Not yet. But he didn't know what he didn't know, and the worst part, the people upstairs didn't care that he didn't know. They just wanted cheaper. I tossed a 5 on the counter and headed out. My boots hit the pavement with that familiar heavy thump, and for the first time in years, I didn't know what shift I was heading into. Still, something told me this wasn't the end, not yet. Logan Myers showed up Monday morning at 8 a.m. sharp. Dress shirt tucked into khakis, hair gelled back, some kind of smart tablet in his hand like it was a shield. His boots were clean, too clean. Mr. McCready, he said, holding out a firm handshake like they teach in business school. Excited to be here. I've read through your production reports. I think there's a lot of efficiency potential in the current flow. He had that wide-eyed optimism that usually lasts about 4 days on a factory floor. First thing I said, handing him a pair of safety glasses and steel-toed boots. We walked the line. The tour took us through the A and B zones, cutting, grinding, finishing. I pointed out where the floor shifts with temperature swings, which machines need a little extra warm-up in winter, which ones hum just a bit too loud when they're overdue for oiling. I showed him how we rotate shift leads to avoid burnout and why we keep Tanya stationed near the break room. Her diabetes means she needs easier access. He nodded a lot, typed on his tablet, asked questions like, do we really need to run diagnostics at every shift change? Or is there any data on the productivity impact of Tanya's station placement? I stopped mid-step the third time he asked something like that. You're not going to find the answers you need on that screen, I said. The floor talks. You just have to listen. He smiled politely. Right, totally. I could already tell. He didn't hear it. The machines, the rhythm of the place, the way it tells you when something's off. Some people pick it up in months, others never do. I was betting Logan was in the latter category, but I gave him everything I could. Over the next few days, I walked him through the full maintenance schedule, explained the logic behind every so-called redundant safety check. Showed him how we order parts ahead of failure, not after. I even tried introducing him to the team, Tanya Miguel Russell, hoping he'd take the time to learn their strengths. But Logan was focused on flowcharts, spent more time at his desk tweaking projections than actually observing the work. During a calibration, I found him comparing Barton's output metrics to a company in Ohio I'd never heard of. We could easily hit a 12% increase by reducing post-shift inspections, he said, not looking up. I didn't say what I was thinking. That 12% could cost someone a hand if the cutter guard jammed unnoticed. Later that week, I was heading to the break room when I caught voices through the half-open door. Logan and Evan. Yeah, the lockout checks Jack insists on. They're not actually in the manual, Logan said. Evan chuckled. Exactly the kind of fresh perspective we were hoping for. I froze in the hallway. Lockout checks weren't about what the manual required. They were about the guy who got electrocuted 10 years ago because someone skipped one. About the 5 close calls we didn't have because we went above and beyond. I walked away before they saw me. My stomach was tight. Not from fear yet, but from the sick realization that they weren't just replacing me. They were gutting what I'd spent 2 decades building. It wasn't the first time I'd seen it. Corporate comes in, trims, the fat ignores the warnings and prays nothing blows up. But this wasn't just some paper-pushing firm. This was our floor, my people. And this kid Logan didn't know that Tanya had nearly passed out from a sugar drop 2 summers ago. Didn't know that Miguel had covered 4 shifts in 1 week during the flood of 19. Didn't know that Russell had been the one to catch a belt slip at 3 a.m. That could have taken out half the line. To him, they were numbers on a spreadsheet. I walked out of the building that evening later than usual, the sun sinking behind the silos. My time was ticking down, and I was realizing the real damage wouldn't come from what Logan changed. It would come from what he didn't understand. They were trusting a man who couldn't hear the machines. And I had a feeling it was only a matter of time before the floor started screaming. My last morning at Barton came with no banners, no donuts in the break room, no farewell speeches. Just an awkward handshake from Patricia, a generic thank you card signed by 4 people who barely knew me, and a temporary badge that would stop working by 5 p.m. Logan was already at my desk when I got in. He had reorganized everything, color-coded folders, cable ties on the keyboard wires, even swapped out the chair. "Hope you don't mind," he said, grinning. "Figured I'd make it my own." I didn't say anything, just handed him the master key ring. He looked at me expectantly. Any last words of wisdom? I paused for a second. Then, yeah. Listen to the floor. He raised his eyebrows like he was waiting for more. I didn't give it, just turned and walked away. I spent the rest of the day clearing out my locker. Tossed the battered thermos I'd used since 2004, folded up the worn coveralls with my name stitched across the chest, and packed the notebooks filled with 20 years of log entries, sketches, and handwritten repair tricks. No one asked for them. No one even knew they existed. At 5:15, I met Tanya, Miguel, and Russell in the back lot, away from cameras and out of sight. The sun was setting, casting that dull amber light that always made the aluminum siding glow like it was on fire. "You sure you want to do this out here?" Miguel asked. "Only place I still trust," I said. We stood in a rough circle, old work jackets zipped up each of them, holding that same tight expression, anger mixed with helplessness. "They're going to start cutting corners," I told them. "You'll see it in parts orders first, then inspections, then schedules, and that kid in my seat, he won't catch it. He already approved a skipped oil rotation on line 3, Russell said. "Figures," I muttered. I reached into my coat and pulled out 3 index cards, each one with my number written in Sharpie. If something changes, maintenance, safety, labor, I don't care what call me. Not management, me. Miguel took his and nodded. "You planning to take this up the chain?" "Not yet," I said, "but we need records. Document everything, photos, timestamps, emails if you can get them." Tanya tucked her card into her front pocket. "You think it's going to get bad? I know it will." A long silence stretched between us. The kind that only comes when people know they're about to walk through fire but can't see how wide the flames go. "You remember that belt jam in 13, I asked, suddenly breaking the silence. Russell snorted. "The gear press on line B." "Yeah, remember what caused it?" Miguel tilted his head. "Weren't no sensor fault. You heard something before the shift started." "Whine in the coupling shaft," I said, real soft like a dog whimpering. No sensor caught it. Just a sound I hadn't heard before. I'd stopped the whole line, checked every tooth and bolt, found a fracture halfway through the shaft, would have snapped before noon, could have flung shrapnel across the floor like a grenade. They all remembered. That's why they showed up tonight. This wasn't just about keeping a factory running. This was about keeping people safe, making sure Tanya went home to her 2 kids, making sure Miguel didn't lose a hand, making sure Russell got to retire with his hearing still intact. "I don't trust corporate," I said quietly, "but I trust you three." They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. Before we split, I pulled a roll of tape from my bag, old habit, and sealed my locker shut. Not because I thought anyone would use it, but because it felt like closing a chapter, like putting a lid on something I wasn't ready to bury yet. As I walked to my truck, I glanced back once. The plant loomed behind me in the fading light, silent, still waiting. Machines don't miss you, but they remember who listens, and I had a feeling they were about to start talking. Loud. 3 days after I left Barton, Tanya called me during her lunch break. "Compressor unit in Zone B is sticking," she said. "Safety latch didn't release clean this morning. Logan told us to let it ride through the shift and monitor it." I felt my jaw tighten. "Did you document it? Photos, timestamp, shift report?" "Miguel's logging it too." "Good," I said. "Don't press him, just stay sharp." That was the start. Over the next 2 weeks, the calls and texts kept coming quiet, careful but consistent. Miguel sent me a photo of coolant pooled around the base of the coil press. The leak had started small, barely a stain on the concrete. Now it was tracking across the floor like a snake. "No maintenance ticket issued," he wrote. "Told to add it to weekly review instead of pulling the line." Then Russell called. Said the overnight crew wasn't running diagnostics anymore unless the system forced a shutdown. Logan had adjusted the shift protocol. "We're supposed to trust the software more," Russell muttered. "Half the guys don't trust their own boots." I started keeping a binder. Handwritten notes, printed screenshots, time-stamped texts, all organized by date, by department, by issue. I logged everything with the kind of detail a courtroom would love. Not because I wanted to go legal, not yet, but I knew what was coming. And I didn't plan to show up empty-handed when it hit. Still, part of me hoped someone upstairs would see it before it got worse. So I wrote an email, direct, respectful, professional, to Evan Trask, Patricia Hume, subject safety and maintenance support post-transition. "Hi, Evan, Patricia. Hope all is well. I've received some informal updates from current employees regarding recent procedural changes, particularly related to maintenance intervals and safety inspections. Given my long history managing those systems, I'd be happy to offer consultation or transition support if you find it useful. Let me know if that would be of interest. Best, Jack McCready," Patricia replied 2 hours later. "Thanks for reaching out, Jack. The transition has been smooth, and Logan has already implemented several efficiency improvements. We'll be in touch if any needs arise." That was corporate for "stay out of it." I didn't reply, just highlighted the message and dropped it into a new folder in my binder, CYA emails. The next incident came 10 days in. A tech named Aaron on line D slipped on hydraulic fluid and cracked his elbow on the guardrail. The fluid had been reported earlier that morning. Miguel had flagged it in the log. No cleanup order issued. Logan filed it as operator error. "Weren't watching his footing," the report said. "Safety notice issued to entire shift." Tanya sent me a copy of the internal memo. "Be more aware of surroundings. Personal responsibility begins with paying attention." No mention of the unattended fluid. No mention of the denied maintenance ticket. I felt my stomach turn over. This wasn't just carelessness anymore. This was a pattern. I stared at the wall of my garage concrete plane quiet. The binder sat on my workbench, already an inch thick. When I worked the floor, I used to say, if we're doing things right, nothing exciting happens. That was the goal. No drama, no injuries, no shutdowns. Just smooth, quiet operations. Like a good engine. Balanced, controlled. Now the floor was rattling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that what was coming wouldn't be quiet at all. I flipped to a fresh page in the binder, dated it, and wrote 11:12 a.m. Aaron D. Line D. Injury slip on unaddressed fluid. Injury minor. Risk systemic. Response management denied contributing factors. Accountability redirected. Then under that, I wrote something I hadn't let myself say out loud yet. It's all starting to crack. Russell showed up at my house on a Friday night. No call. Just knocked twice and waited with his hands jammed in his coat pockets like he was delivering bad news he didn't want to carry. I opened the door and stepped aside without a word. He walked in, dropped into the kitchen chair like it had been waiting for him all week, and slid a thumb drive across the table. "What's this logs?" "The real ones. And the ones they showed the auditors," he said. "You'll want to look at the timestamps." I plugged it into my laptop. 2 folders, identical names, different file sizes. One labeled Internal Records, the other Audit Copies. I opened them side by side. It was worse than I thought. Maintenance logs stripped of red flags, Parts orders rewritten to show fulfilled when I knew the inventory had been dry for weeks. Inspections marked passed on machines that hadn't seen a full diagnostic in a month. It wasn't sloppy, it was deliberate. "What the hell is this email?" I asked, scrolling to a message from someone named Collier at Axiom Partners. Russell leaned over my shoulder. "Keep reading." "Insurance handles incidents. Missed targets hurt investors. Focus resources where they matter." I sat back in my chair, the heat rising in my chest. They were budgeting for injuries, betting that as long as no one died, it was worth the risk. "They planning to kill someone to hit Q4, I muttered. "Feels like it," Russell said. Then he hesitated. "There's more." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, set it gently on the table like it might break. "Tanya's nephew, Caleb, 19, got pulled into a jammed loader yesterday, lost 2 fingers. I went still. He's in the hospital. They had him sign paperwork while he was on pain meds, called it operator error. Tanya's losing it." My hands curled into fists without meaning to. "They used that kid," I said slowly. "Used his pain to cover their negligence," Russell nodded. "And unless someone blows the whistle, it'll be buried, just like everything else." For a long time, I didn't say anything. Just sat there staring at the thumb drive, the paper, the quiet hum of my fridge in the background, like the floor whispering from memory. When they pushed me out, I was ready to walk away. I'd built the system, left it in place, tried to believe that maybe it could run without me. But systems don't protect people. People protect people. And the ones who could were either gone silenced or scared. That's when I knew. This wasn't about getting even anymore. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about stopping something bigger than any of us, before it broke someone completely. I looked at Russell. "Call Tanya, Miguel, a few others we trust. I want a meeting, off-site, no texts, no emails." Russell's eyes narrowed. "What are you planning?" I stood and walked over to the workbench, pulled down the thick black binder I'd been building, slapped it on the table beside the drive, and opened to the page with Caleb's name. "Leverage," I said. "We're not just going to stop the bleeding anymore." I flipped the binder shut and looked him dead in the eye. "We're going to expose the wound." Russell nodded once. No hesitation. They're not going to see this coming. I made 3 calls that week. The first was to George Lawson at Meridian Energy, Barton's biggest client, responsible for nearly a third of our contracts. We met for coffee at a diner 15 minutes from the plant. I brought photos valves with surface cracks, pressure seals already degrading weeks after installation. "These passed inspection?" George asked, frowning. "The new process," I said. "They streamlined out half the QA protocols." George stared at the photos, then at me. "Jack, you're not working there anymore." "I know," I said. "But if one of these fails on your end, I couldn't live with that." He didn't respond right away, just looked down, jaw tight. "I'll call my team," he said finally. "We'll initiate an independent audit." The second call was to Helen Barnes at the State Industrial Safety Board. She'd inspected Barton before, but this time I didn't just send a complaint. I sent the drive. Logs, photos, internal emails. A full packet organized, time-stamped, undeniable. "This is substantial," Helen said. "I'll need to bring in my supervisor. Just keep my name out of it for now," I told her. The third call was the riskiest. I asked Logan Myers to meet me off-site, no emails, no texts. He showed up at a strip mall sandwich shop looking like he hadn't slept in 3 days. Shirt wrinkled, eyes hollow. "How's the floor?" I asked after we sat. He let out a slow breath. "It's a mess. The cutting line's down twice a week. Production's off by 20%. Evan's on my back daily." "They didn't tell you what you were walking into," I said. "They told me it needed modernizing, that you were resistant to change, but every time I fix something, 3 more problems show up." I nodded. "Because they dismantled the safety net and left you holding the rope." Logan rubbed his face. "I tried submitting repair requests. They keep getting denied. I'm just stuck." "Then get unstuck," I said, leaning in. "In about 2 weeks, Meridian's audit will land. So will a surprise inspection from the board. And I've already shared evidence of the cover-up with both." His eyes widened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you have a choice. Be the fall guy when it all collapses or help fix it." He stared down at his untouched sandwich. "They'll fire me." "Maybe. But you'll sleep at night. And you won't have someone's injury or death on your conscience." I slid him a card. 1 week. I need everything you've got. Tickets denied, protocols skipped, any order you tried to push upstream and got blocked. 3 days later, he texted, "I'm in. What do you need from me?" But fate moved faster than I did. The next morning at 6:15 a.m., my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew the voice the second it spoke. Jack Evans said, breath tight, "We have a situation. What happened? The number 1 hydraulic press just failed. Catastrophic. Production is at a full stop. Maintenance can't isolate the issue." "That's because you fired Sam," I said, "who ran that press for 15 years. He didn't argue. We need your help. We'll pay for your time. Just please. We need it operational by end of week." I let the silence hang before I answered. "I'll be there in an hour," I said, "but I have conditions. Name them. I bring my own team, Miguel, Tanya, and Russell. I have full authority on parts and decisions. And I want access to all maintenance records from the last 6 months. Unfiltered." There was a pause. "Fine," Evans said. "Whatever it takes." An hour later, I walked through the factory doors. The place looked like it had been hit by a tornado. Machines idle, operators standing around, supervisors whispering in corners. Logan met me at the press, eyes bloodshot. "It's worse than I thought." I clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Let's get to work." But before I picked up a wrench, I opened my phone and sent one final email addressed to Axiom, the State Board, and Meridian. Subject: systemic failures and suppressed safety risks. Body attached is a full report documenting the root causes of Barton's current production shutdown. Every corner cut, every risk ignored, every signature on every denial. Then I looked at Evans, standing pale and silent in the corner. "You wanted it running again," I said. "But first, everyone needs to know exactly how it broke." It took 3 full days to fix what 6 months of bad leadership had broken. The hydraulic press was worse off than I expected. Faulty seals, worn bearings, missed lubrication intervals, a clogged regulator that could have caused a pressure spike big enough to snap steel. But with Miguel on maintenance, Tanya tracking workflow, and Russell coordinating night crews, we brought it back to life. No shortcuts, no hacks. Just the right tools, the right people, and a lot of lost time made right. On day 2, the safety board arrived unannounced. Helen Barnes herself led the walkthrough, and this time she didn't bring just a clipboard. She brought a full team. They interviewed operators one-on-one, checked logs, opened cabinets that hadn't been inspected in weeks. "Someone's been cleaning up in a panic," she said to me quietly. "But not well enough." That same afternoon, Meridian announced they were suspending all future orders until their internal audit was complete. By the end of day 3, the floor was buzzing with rumors. Evan Trask was gone, reassigned to corporate, though no one seemed to know what that actually meant. Logan, shell-shocked but still standing, was pulled off direct floor oversight and now reported to someone new. That someone was Thomas Whitfield, an operations director. Axiom flew in from Chicago. Clean suit, calm voice, no fake smiles. He asked to meet me privately once the press was humming again. "I've reviewed your report," he said, holding my binder in his hands. "Very thorough." I nodded. "It's not just the press, it's the culture. What happened here wasn't just neglect, it was accepted neglect." He didn't argue. "We're overhauling safety protocols at every Barton site, immediate audits, full retraining." I waited. "We want you to lead that process," he said. "Director of Manufacturing Operations, full benefits, salary 30% above your last. Autonomy over procedures and scheduling within budget guidelines, of course." I stared at him. "That's the problem," I said. "Safety can't be budgeted quarter by quarter." He tilted his head. "Then what do you want?" 3 days a week. Consultant rate. My team, my way. I don't report to Evan's replacement. I report to results." He thought for a moment. Then he nodded. "Deal." I didn't go back for the title, or the paycheck, or the satisfaction of watching the people who ignored me scramble to keep their jobs. I went back for Tanya, for Miguel, for Russell, for Caleb, who was still learning how to write left-handed, for everyone who deserved to come home with 10 fingers and a full paycheck. The following Monday, I showed up just before shift change. Walked the floor with a clipboard in hand, not to check boxes, but to listen. The number 3 press was already humming better. Someone had cleaned the filter without being told. Tanya met my eyes as I passed and gave me a nod. Nothing big, just a quiet signal between old pros. Russell handed me a shift log with notes better than anything I'd seen in a year. Miguel was halfway under the coil feeder, wrench in hand, whistling like he used to when things were under control. The floor felt different. Not fixed, not perfect, but steady, safer, smarter. I paused near the center aisle, closed my eyes, and just listened. The cutters, the presses, the conveyors, they all had a rhythm again. A familiar one. Tight, efficient, alive. Machines don't talk the way people do. But if you've been around long enough, you learn their voice. And if you leave for a while, they notice. They don't miss you, but they remember you. And that morning, the floor remembered me.